Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Civics Chat with LCF Georgia and Los Vecinos of Buford Highway. Victoria, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Michelle. How are you?
Doing wonderful. And today we have an amazing guest, Samuel Aguilar. He is the Georgia State Director for Forward. How are you doing today, Sam?
Hey,
Sam. Hey, I'm doing pretty well. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to our Civic Chat.
I feel like I'm on the hot seat tonight.
Absolutely. So thank you guys so much for joining us for another episode of Civics Chat, where we are going to go over everything that's going to be on your ballot for this November elections. Today, we're going to talk about the House resolution and House bill that will be on your election ballot. But first, we do want to remind you guys to go ahead and fill out our pledge card. It is in the caption where you can
I don't know. I think Michelle's breaking over it. So it's going to be in our caption where you can sign up to pledge to vote. It is a bit.ly link you see. And yeah, just fill it out. Pledge to vote, guys. Coming November 3rd. Okay. So hi, Samuel. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. I've seen a lot of it on social media. I don't know about you.
Yeah. Especially lately. I think the amendments and all the things at the bottom of the ballots are usually very tricky. The state doesn't do a great job of wording them in a way that most people will be able to understand. No, but luckily, I'm someone who works with the state legislature. I'm not an attorney, so I'll go ahead and say that at the forefront. But I know I've been able to figure out a little bit more about what exactly it all means and how to break it down for people.
Okay. Do you want to go ahead and just introduce what company you work for?
Yeah, absolutely. So professionally, I work for an organization called Forward US. And so we're a bipartisan policy group, and we lobby for bipartisan immigration policies, both at the state and federal level. So through my profession, I have access to elected officials, community leaders, even like the policy nerds that are writing these policies down at the state capitol. So a lot of access to government. And so I don't necessarily work in an electoral role, but definitely have access to all the levers of sort of state, local, and federal government.
That sounds like a really amazing work, honestly. That's really good. I haven't really heard much about Forward, but when I was looking at it all, I was just like, wow, they're doing amazing work. You're the director?
Yes, yeah, state director here in Georgia. Thank you. That means a lot. And I think that if I'm doing my job, if my office is doing their job, then we won't be in the headlines, hopefully. Yeah. But what we do try to do is to elevate immigrant narratives, to elevate the businesses that are keeping Georgia, thriving, and to really make those connects and try to get past a lot of political gridlock, a lot of bad political rhetoric that's out there, and talk about policies and people and communities.
Well, I'm glad you're joining us tonight for this Civics Chat, because we definitely need your type of input in these House resolutions and House bills, because there has been a lot of talk about on social media, especially going on. And even when I was reading them, they make it seem like they're so simple, but I mean, I feel like they're just not telling us all we need to know when we're going to vote. So I think it's definitely important that anyone who's watching this take notes. And just do your own research, if anything, after, just so you know what you're going to do when you go to the polls to vote. Okay, so let's start, Samuel, with the constitutional amendments. Well, first of all, guys, that is an alteration made to a constitution, a statute, or legislative bill or resolution. And the one we're referring to tonight for the ballot is the House Resolution 164. So this basically on your ballot, what it says is it authorizes dedication of fees and taxes to their intended purposes by general state law. So what exactly does this mean, Samuel?
Great question. So I think on the on the ballot, it'll be more of a sort of paragraph length sort of statement on there. But basically it's a bunch of like legalese, but what it comes down to is basically this amendment would allow the state legislature to use funds that it has set aside for a specific purpose to use them for that purpose. And if that sounds redundant, it's because I think it is, in my opinion. So basically what we're talking about is this is Amendment 1.
Okay.
Amendment 1, House Resolution 164. And so basically, if you vote yes for this, you are voting for the state legislature to basically set aside a certain amount of funds. And I'll kind of give a backstory here in a little bit. And then at the end of the year, when it sees how much money it collected, instead of reapportioning the money that it didn't use for that specific purpose and just putting it back towards the general fund, it sort of forces the state legislature and forces the state to use that money that was put aside for that purpose. And so so before it becomes an amendment on your ballot, it actually had to go through the state legislature. And this resolution, House Resolution 164, had broad bipartisan support on both sides of the aisle. And the backstory here, really, it's kind of weird, but if you read about it, it comes back to the Solid Waste Trust Fund that the state established some time ago. And so basically, there was a study that found out that even though about close to $3 million were raised from Georgians and folks that paid their taxes, $3 million were raised that were eventually used for other purposes.
Okay.
So it was almost like the state had this free $3 million fund sitting around that it had collected for a specific purpose, but there was no law or no anything really holding them to spend it for that solid waste trust fund, which would have, gone to development projects and stuff like that. Okay. That's just one example of how currently the state legislature is reapportioning money that should be going towards a specific cause for other causes. And then, so a no vote to Amendment 1 would basically keep the status quo in place and allow the state legislature to basically use those funds for other projects as they see fit. Okay. Hopefully that cleared it up a little bit, but if not, I'm here for any other kind of follow-up questions.
Okay, so does this resolution make it easier or harder for lawmakers to pass legislation or budget?
So in my opinion, I don't think it would have much effect on the budget process. Yeah. The only thing, so if it were to pass, if this amendment were to pass, then lawmakers would go through the budget process knowing that those, $3 million a year that go to the solid waste trust fund now have to sit in that fund and can't be, used for other purposes.
Okay. And so when you say, let's use your example, the $3 million, if it sits in that trust fund, will it just go, do you think it will like accumulate over time and that money would just be sitting there? Like, would it turn into like 6 million after if they didn't use it for its purpose? Or are they just like, is there just no reason to use it for that purpose, for the solid waste fund?
So that's a great question. So yeah, if basically those $3 million, let's say 10 years ago, we would have kept those $3 million in the solid waste trust fund. Okay. That money, I don't know if it would have doubled. I'm not a markets guy, but more than likely we'd have more than $3 million sitting there in that fund. Okay. And so basically that would have been an investment into the state's future, solid waste transportation, solid waste, developing new facilities and things like that. Oh, okay. Instead, what happened is because Amendment 1 wasn't in place, those $3 million never really got put into the fund. And so instead they were used, for other state expenses that came up at the time. So, yeah.
Okay. And how do you think, if any, how would this impact the Latino community?
That's a good question. I mean, I think this is one of those things that I think would impact Georgians across the board. Kind of in whatever is important to you, whether that's the solid waste trust fund. I hope not a very sexy policy there. But whether it's that, whether it's funding for you know, let's say there's a lot of Gwinnett transportation issues right now. So let's say it was funding for rail in Gwinnett, or funding for public transportation in Gwinnett, funding for a new community playground in South Atlanta, right? So basically it would make sure that if the state legislature allocates a pocket of money towards a specific cause, then that it goes towards that cause. So yeah, I think across the board, if you're, you know, a Latino Georgian, white Georgian, Asian, Black Georgian, the impact of this policy is kind of felt across the board.
Okay. And so if we vote yes on this, does this mean fees might go up? Because I've also seen a lot on social media, and they refer a lot to, you said the solid waste. Would that be like the tire cleanup?
Another great question. I'm glad you asked. So,
you know, like on Instagram and Twitter, everyone's referring it to like the tire cleanup.
Yeah. So that is and I guess folks are a lot more aware of that tire cleanup fee when they fix their cars. So in sort of by nature, like on its own, if we all, you know, if enough Georgians vote yes and Amendment 1 passes, fees will not go up the next day per se. But I think this does affect the mindset of lawmakers as they think about budgets in the future. So if I'm on both sides of the aisle, right? So if I'm a lawmaker and I know that the sort of slush money that we can move around from different pockets of allocation are no longer going to be available, and we have to really stick to some of these tight budget decisions that we make, and the budget process becomes less, in my opinion, becomes more transparent, and it becomes less about people that know how to move pockets of money around at the end of the fiscal year. So all that to say, in my opinion, I don't think the tire fee will go up the very next day. But I think when the projects that we're trying to fund with the tire fee maybe aren't getting the same amount of funding, or maybe are getting more funding because now it's being allocated directly to that, then we might see changes in that process. But that's something that elected officials will have to take up after the fact. And you'll have a choice to voice your opinions on that matter when it comes up.
Okay. And one final question for this one, because I'm curious. So with this amendment, do you think this will kind of force lawmakers to say, okay, since we have $3 million for solid waste fund, let's see how we can use these $3 million, how we can improve solid waste in general, or like, you know how you were talking about building new projects for it and stuff like that. Do you think it would give them like more motivation to use up those $3 million?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So I think specifically for state legislators and how they think about budgets in the very near future. But I think it's also a sigh of relief for city, county, and state level administrators who will now have a bit more of expectations set around what their budgets will look like year in and year out, right? So and I believe this amendment in sort of like the fine print that's in the House resolution, I believe this amendment also comes with new reporting guidelines where state agencies and these state agencies and new projects that are funded by these special allocations now have to report, obviously, how much money they brought in, but what that money is going towards, not only the next year, but in years to come. So thinking about those 5 and 10-year investments later on the road.
Okay, great. That's some really good information. I'm so happy you went over it because, I mean, I didn't know a lot of that stuff. And without even doing the research, I mean, it's very broad. They don't really tell you, like, they don't get to the point. You know?
Yeah, it's a lot of lawyers and wannabe lawyers kind of talking to each other, and sometimes they don't really translate it down to the kind of everyday folks.
Right. So, actually now I'm actually looking at my ballot right now. I got my absentee ballot, and this is mostly what people are going to see, right? And it's very just like a one sentence, and then it mentions, right, the bill or the resolution in this case. And a lot of people, they read it and we have no idea what this means, right? And it's good for us to ask these questions, to have these conversations so that we can, know what we're voting for at the end of the day. Look at how broad, look at how much this one resolution impacts, right? And just how big, with the big impact that it has. So thank you so much for that. So we're going to move on to the second resolution, House Resolution, which is House Resolution 1023. I'm going to read it out loud. So, shall the Constitution of Georgia be amended to waive sovereign immunity and allow the people of Georgia to petition the Superior Court for relief from governmental acts done outside the scope of lawful authority or which violate the laws of the state, the Constitution of Georgia, or the Constitution of the United States? So, Sam, first and foremost, I want to ask, how are things now? Does state law not already overturn or override municipal law?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So the word sovereign immunity is used. It has a couple different uses in our legal system. So you're absolutely right. As right now, state law supersedes county law, supersedes municipal and like city ordinances and things like that. So it kind of goes in that order. And so sometimes when we hear about or read about sovereign immunity, it might be about a city or municipality suing the state or the county or something like that. And so this constitutional amendment brings it actually back down a bit lower to the individual level. So this is talking about an individual or an organization being able to sue the state government or any sort of state agencies. And so sovereign immunity is something that, as of right now, kind of how current law is, we as citizens are not allowed to sue the state for anything that we find. If they try to pass a law that's unconstitutional, or if our rights are violated in some way, we currently don't have the authority to sue the state for the sole fact that I don't know if there's a fact behind it. We just can't sue the state. And so what this would do, all of that beautiful wording, Constitutional Amendment 2 basically allows citizens, it allows residents of Georgia to be able to sue the state if they pass laws that are unconstitutional, or if laws that are currently on the books are applied in a manner that is deemed as either against the Constitution of the state of Georgia, or against one of the laws that the state of Georgia has on its books, or against the Constitution of the United States.
Gotcha. Okay, so another question that I have is, what are the consequences that could bring if individuals like you and I can sue the state? Because, and this is just me wondering, is there a reason why we can't sue the state in the first place?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And I can tell you a little bit of the backstory in the state legislature. This is a bipartisan measure that moved pretty bipartisanly. Before it got to your ballot, it kind of had to be approved by the state legislature. And so this is a measure that has seen the chambers of our state legislature for a few years now, and it has actually passed, I think once, maybe twice, has been passed into law, but has been vetoed by governors, initially by Governor Deal and now Governor Kemp. And in my notes here, I wrote down that in the past, supporters have put the measure into the form of a constitutional amendment after 2 governors vetoed previous bills passed by the General Assembly. So unlike statutes, or unlike a bill which becomes a law that the governor has to sign on, a constitutional amendment goes straight to the voters. So not saying that this is the state legislature's way of circumventing Governor Kemp and giving it the issue to the people of Georgia, but maybe I am saying that's what it is. And so some of the reasons that we've seen in the past that this issue was vetoed was because of the fear of sort of unprecedented judicial intervention into daily management decisions entrusted to the executive branch of government. And that's a quote directly from Governor Deal's veto in 2016. And so basically what that means is the fear of kind of doing away with sovereign immunity is that everyday people will find nitpicky sort of things to sue the government about, resulting in a series of legal fees, a series of settlements, and for things that are considered quite frivolous and not really endangering the civil rights of Georgians.
Right, things that would be like out of spite, right, or out of anger, or I'm inconvenienced in the smallest way, so I'm going to sue the government kind of thing, right?
Exactly, yeah. And so that has been sort of the argument against it. Supposedly, there's sort of safeguards in place, specifically around sort of the legal fees that the state would have to take on if they are sued, if and when they are sued by citizens. But yeah, I think that's one of the leading arguments against sort of ending sovereign immunity for the state, is that thought that, sort of everyone's just going to want to sue the government out of nowhere.
Right. And so sovereign immunity is that you can't get sued, correct? It's like you cannot be charged or sued, or is it just sued?
So like, are you asking like in a criminal court if the state could be charged?
Right. Right.
So,
I guess the definition of sovereign immunity is that you can't get sued, correct?
Yes. Yeah. And so this does nothing to protect to basically end sovereign immunity for individuals. So things like if a police officer, you still cannot sue a police officer if they did something that was like in their line of duty or whatever. Like this, enacting this amendment would only apply to the state of Georgia. And if you can find a good reason why you would take the state of Georgia to a criminal court of law, that is a really good question. I don't know. Right.
And that would be, I would think, very expensive. That person would really have to think it out.
That would be like world news right there.
Right.
It does nothing to protect like individuals that, it does nothing to change protections against individuals that are acting on behalf of the state. So we're talking more sort of the state in and of itself. And actually, I have a great example that applies. Sorry, you see my boy Baxter. Here's my dog in the room. For those of you into sort of immigration and the issue of DACA recipients getting in-state tuition here in the state of Georgia, an attorney by the names of Charles Cook, immigration attorney from Atlanta, actually sued the state and had received a positive judgment in one court, basically saying the state of Georgia was not following its own laws when it decided to ban undocumented students from attending top public colleges and universities. And so later on in the appeal, it was found that Charles Cook could not sue the state of Georgia because of sovereign immunity. So there was no way that his lawsuit could even continue because of that. And so, I mean, there's a kind of a backstory to what happened next. But for this sort of talking about the amendment, that's how big something like sovereign immunity is. Like if Charles Cook were to be allowed to continue his lawsuit on behalf of undocumented students, then we could see a different outcome now and maybe policy changes that would have reflected that decision.
And that goes hand in hand with my next question is, how does this impact the Latino community? But you mentioned that right there. I mean, now, let's be clear, DACA recipients are not just Latinos. They are people from all over the world. But, if we could, if maybe, let's say, undocumented or people who are DACA-fied, that could impact the Latino community if something like this would be passed.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. No, so I think it goes beyond that too, right? In the I wouldn't say the new era of politics, but in an era of politics where the judicial system is put sort of front and center on a lot of these things. Think about the major abortion debate in the state last year, LGBTQ sort of religious freedom policies in that we've seen in past legislative sessions. And then obviously the in-state tuition thing, I think for across the board for all Georgians, but especially Georgians of color, especially Georgians in minority or oppressed communities that have the judicial system as sort of one avenue of advocacy. This would really be a game changer for those communities.
Awesome. All right. So, Victoria, did you want to go ahead and go with the statewide referendum?
Yes. Okay. So for the statewide referendum, this is actually when voters have the opportunity to approve or reject laws, either proposed or enacted by the legislator. So we are going to look at the House Bill 344, which is Statewide Referendum A. And it says, shall the act be approved which provides an exemption from ad valorem taxes for all real property owned by a purely public charity, if such charity is exempt from taxation under Section 501c3 of the Federal Internal Revenue Code, and such real property is held exclusively for the purpose of building or repairing single-family homes to be financed by such charity to individuals using loans that shall not bear interest.
Catch your breath, Victoria. Yeah.
There's barely any commas in there.
Yeah.
So what exactly does this mean, Samuel?
Oh, so this one I actually had to do some background digging into the issue. Not very clear at all. But basically what this policy would do is it would exempt certain properties from property taxes, meaning that it would exempt a specific set of households from property taxes. Now, in order to get that exemption, you would have to be a 501c charitable organization. So obviously those are organizations that are classically considered nonprofits. They're registered with the government. They do public good or charitable causes. Next up, you would as a part of that organization would have to be constructing or renovating homes that they would then single family homes. So only one family could live in those homes. And then they would have to sell or lease those properties back to members of the community at lower rates. So basically to allow for more affordable housing.
Gotcha. So there's a lot of technicalities with this law. You know, so it has to be a public charity that builds homes. They don't get taxed on what they're built. Would this is the intention to so that these public charities will have more money for housing, or what is kind of what we're trying to, or what is trying to be achieved here?
Yeah, and so I forgot to include that the homes would then have to be provided at sold and provided at interest-free financing to the individuals purchasing the home. And so basically, through that explanation, what we're reading between the lines, what we get to is the government wants to stop charging property taxes on organizations that are doing good by either building or remodeling homes in areas and then selling those homes with no interest loans to people in the community. So yes, we could say the government is subsidizing affordable housing for members of the community through charitable organizations that build homes. And if Habitat for Humanity kind of comes to mind, that's exactly the organization that would benefit from this. I'm sure there might be a handful of others. Okay. When we think about projects like this, when we think about housing organizations, in particular those that build or renovate homes, the Habitat for Humanity model is definitely what would benefit here.
And would this affect other things, maybe like school funding or other area of funding, or what do you think?
Yes, unfortunately, school funding is led directly by property tax revenues.
Okay.
And so that's the property taxes of a local community are what go to fund the school. So unfortunately, this proposal lowers property tax revenue, even though it increases affordable housing, and by giving these tax breaks to the organizations, that tax revenue is now no longer being collected by the county and no longer being given to the county school system. Now, it really depends on the impact of that funding, is like on how many schools of this type of property tax break are in that community or in that county. you know, what other funding sources sort of are involved there. So the impact could be negligible or it could be huge depending on the community. You'd have to really dive into budgets to figure that out. But the easy answer is yes, it definitely has a potential to impact school funding, and then also any other sort of funding that is driven by property tax rates.
Interesting. And I know we talked about certain real property, and you say those are just like charities like Habitat for Humanity, but what else qualifies as like certain real property?
Yeah. So I could be entirely wrong, but from my reading and my understanding of what they've kind of provided us, it would have to meet those qualifications. So it would have to be a 501c charitable organization that is doing actually physically the building or the remodeling. And then that home would have to be resold at a 0 interest rate. So like technically the organization is not profiting off of that home. They are simply helping provide more affordable housing.
Okay.
But from my understanding of it, that would be the only sort of property that could benefit from this.
Okay.
Sam, and just one last question. Is it fair to say that this is maybe an attempt to privatize a public housing, like kind of that public housing industry, or, you know, for example, instead of having public housing or anything like that, they are trying to kind of transfer so that nonprofits will be the ones doing this kind of work. Is it fair to assume that, or to connect those points?
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly say it's fair. I can't speak for the intentions of the legislators that brought this about, but no, looking at it as not necessarily a model for privatization, but looking at what the effects of this rule would lead to, I would say yes, more people would be likely to want to invest in building, building affordable housing because of that property tax break. It'd be very difficult for a company to sort of, like, let's say, dip their toe into this market, so to speak. I always hate thinking about tax breaks as a market, but yeah, it is what it is. So yeah, I think for the most part, it would be established organizations and community groups, such as Habitat or others, that would really benefit from it. But no, I think you could definitely see where a model towards privatization or towards more towards having the private sector take on the building of affordable housing would be true. But to add to that, as a kind of devil's advocate, I will also say this amendment on its own, this rule change on its own, does not decrease funding for public housing. There's other people are trying to do that for sure, but this one does not do that. It only discusses that tax break.
Awesome. Well, I didn't have any more questions for you, but I definitely want to thank you so much for taking the time and explaining this. I have seen, as of recent, a lot of people have been messaging me. There's this very popular explanation of these bills that went viral on Twitter recently. I'm sure y'all have seen it, and I was very much looking forward to this conversation because of that, right? A lot of things go viral online, and a lot of things can be misleading or very opinionated and biased. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations, right? In a safe space where we can really have these discussions. So thank you so much for your time, Sam. I really appreciate it. Just a call to action to everybody that is watching. Remember, early elections started yesterday. If you are voting in person and voting early, please vote early as soon as possible. And then also, if you're going to send your ballot box, or if you want to request your absentee ballot, do that as soon as possible. There is a big demand this time around, and lines are long. So do not leave anything for last minute. Remember, we are on Facebook Live. For today, we did just Facebook Live, but we are usually on Facebook Live and Instagram Live every Tuesday at 8, discussing these very important topics. Thank you so much, Sam, for joining us tonight.
Sam, this was a great live, very informative. I learned a lot of new things. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join our Civics Chat. You're our first special guest.
Thank you all for having me. Thank you for all the great work that you're doing for our community. So yeah.
Thank you guys so much.
Bye,
Bye y'all.
Bye.